Protesters are filling the streets of Puerto Rico's capital right now. They are continuing a week of demonstrations demanding the resignation of the governor there, who's embroiled in a social media scandal. Correspondent Jeff Paul is in San Juan tonight. Good evening, Jeff.
Good evening, Brent. Yeah, there are no signs of these protesters slowing down. They have been out here all week trying to get as close as they can to the governor's house. This spirited group has been chanting, singing, and at times marching, all under the unified message they want Ricardo Rosselló gone. The people here are not only upset over the leaked chats involving the governor and members of his cabinet, but there is a general distrust for anyone involved in this administration to lead them moving forward.
This is the time to fight. This is the time. We are a country that is ready to rise up. We are ashamed and we will not allow this.
Trust in the governor has been broken. People do not believe in him. And if he had a drop of dignity, he would resign.
The governor here, meanwhile, active today on social media. He tweeted out 2 pictures, at least, of himself surrounded by some of his cabinet members, but made no mention today of the ongoing protests or any plans to resign. But some Democrats who are presidential candidates for 2020 are now weighing in. Pete Buttigieg, Julian Castro, Tulsi Gabbard, Kirsten Gillibrand, Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Marianne Williamson are some who tweeted out their support for these protesters.
We've seen comments that he and others in the administration have made. We've seen them using force against the people of Puerto Rico. This governor can no longer be effective, and I believe that he should resign.
President Trump also tweeting about Puerto Rico just the other day. He said some bad things are happening in Puerto Rico and that it was foolish for Congress to give $92 billion in hurricane relief. But according to federal data, so far the U.S. Congress has approved about $42.5 billion for hurricane relief, but this island has only received less than $14 billion since May. Brett?
Jeff Paul, live in San Juan. Jeff, thank you.
Now, a strong earthquake has rocked the Greek capital Athens, sending people running from buildings in panic. The European Earthquake Monitoring Centre recorded a magnitude 5.1 quake whose epicenter was just 22 kilometers northwest of Athens. Well, the quake temporarily brought down power lines and phone connections. Hundreds of people have been pouring onto the streets fearing aftershocks, and there are also reports that some old buildings have partially collapsed. Well, let's go to Athens now for the latest from our correspondent Panos Kitsakopoulos. Panos, what's going on there now? Authorities saying that the worst is over?
Hi, Tox. Listen, the worst is indeed over. It appears to be over. Scientists are still figuring out whether this 5.1 Richter earthquake was the main earthquake. It appears so. But first, let me say we're all safe here at the Euronews office in Athens. We really felt it. But that's not particular news since there weren't any significant damages or injuries reported. There were some very old uninhabited buildings which sustained superficial damages, and just a few collapsed, like an old loading structure in the Piraeus port. Luckily, no one was at harm's way there. Now, until now, only 2 people were reported lightly injured by falling debris. The one is a 6 months pregnant tourist and the second a local woman. Now, since the earthquake happened at 1:15 Central European time, so at work time. Apart from the initial panic, people in Attica and Evia exited their buildings orderly, and most of them went to open spaces until it was safe to return. About an hour after the initial tremor and a little after a second strong earthquake. But it's worth noting, however, that as earthquakes are a common phenomenon in Greece, we Greeks are sufficiently educated in coping with them.
Panos Kitsakopoulos with the latest from our office there in Athens. Thank you.
Well, we know that there was a COBRA meeting at officials level, and that is the government's crisis meeting grouping, a real sign that this is a serious crisis for the UK government. And usually when you have an officials level meeting, that will usually be followed by a ministers level meeting. This is probably the last thing that Theresa May would have wanted to have happened at the very end of her watch. But it really is a crisis. It's the kind of worst nightmare scenario that we had ever since Iran threatened to target British tankers following the seizure with the help of British Royal Marines of an Iranian tanker off the coast of Gibraltar 2 weeks ago. Since then, we've had evidence of the Royal Navy, a warship, HMS Montrose, a Type 23 frigate, not officially escorting, but for all intents and purposes, escorting a number of commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow waterway between Iran and the United Arab Emirates. On this occasion, though, there was no Royal Navy ship, it would seem, able to intervene to prevent what looks like a military operation to force this British flag tanker to turn swiftly into Iranian waters and now be held by the Iranians. It's a significant escalation, and one that goes against what Britain has been trying to achieve throughout the heightened tensions between the United States and Iran in the Gulf, and that is for de-escalation. So it really will remain to be seen how the UK does respond. Obviously, the priority is to secure the release of this tanker and the safe release of its 23 crew members. Iran will most likely be wanting, in return, the release of its tanker. Britain has tried the whole way through since the seizure of the Grace 1 tanker off Gibraltar to differentiate between that situation, which it says was all about upholding EU sanctions against importing oil into Syria, and the crisis in the Gulf. Iran sees no such distinction. It wants the release of its tanker, and you could well imagine it holding this British tanker until that happens.
Deborah, there's been some criticism this evening that the British Navy simply hasn't been doing enough to escort British-flagged vessels through the Strait of Hormuz at this very sensitive and difficult time. Just remind us of what Navy hardware is currently in the region.
Yes, and that criticism is to be expected, frankly. It's not like Britain didn't have sufficient warning that its vessels were specifically being targeted by Iran. However, for the UK side of things, they've got to tread this delicate balancing act between not wanting to escalate the situation by increasing their military presence significantly in the Gulf.
This brutal heat, and tonight it has turned deadly now. Authorities declaring heat emergencies in communities across this country, 34 states, more than 200 million Americans under alerts right now. And look at the numbers for tomorrow. The heat index, the feel-like reading, 111 in D.C., 110 in Philadelphia, 108 in New York City. The Midwest already seeing numbers that high. Tonight, the former pro football player who died of heat stroke, and the power station exploding, leaving thousands without power, and several subway lines shut down just moments ago here in New York City. ABC's Gio Benitez leading us off.
Tonight, that life-threatening heat has first responders on high alert.
Who is most at risk?
Anyone's at risk.
We spent the day with paramedics in the Philadelphia suburbs. They tell us there's a reason why parents need to watch their kids.
When you're talking about children, you're talking about their body temperature rising, what, 3 to 5 times faster than adults?
Correct. Way much faster than you and I, because they're smaller. They can't regulate their temperature like a like you or I can.
Not far away, some elderly and disabled residents were forced to evacuate when their apartments lost power.
Describe to me what it's like inside your apartment right now.
About 95 degrees and getting hotter.
We have medic units on scene monitoring the patients who need it.
In Chicago,
that heat will become so intense today, it could be life-threatening.
A heat index of at least 105 degrees, pushing the limits of infrastructure. Our Stephanie Ramos is there.
These crews are inspecting roads threatened by the intense heat. The city says the extremely high temperatures could cause pavement blowouts and roads to buckle.
In Arkansas, former New York Giants offensive lineman Mitch Petrus dying of heat stroke after working outside all day. He was just 32. In New York City, race organizers canceling the New York City Triathlon this weekend, the city under a heat emergency. Power officials confident the grid will hold after last weekend's blackout.
We're ready for what the heat will bring, and as I said, we expect demands this weekend to rival all-time weekend peaks.
New York's mayor asking residents to turn their thermostats up to 78 degrees to help save power.
And David, here in Philly, we're looking at a top heat index today of 104. That number could grow to 113 over the weekend. And again, we've just learned that in New York City, several subway lines have been shut down. We don't know if that's heat related, but David, of course, there are major concerns over infrastructure.
All right, Gio Benitez leading us off live in Philadelphia tonight. Gio, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.